How are you this evening?
Good evening.
Good evening. How are you doing, Dr. Pillai? Am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Yes, I'm sorry, Melvin. I just got my sound on. I missed what you just said.
So am I pronouncing Asha Pillai? Is that correct or incorrect?
It's Asha Pillai.
Asha Pillai, and I'm embarrassed, but thank you very much.
Don't be at all embarrassed. It's not an easy one.
Okay. I'm so happy that you're here. We're going to go ahead and get started. I know we have other people joining us, but we will go ahead and get started because we're already late.
I'm sorry for my delay. Yeah.
No problem. If you will allow me, please, to do a slight introduction and we'll move on from that point. Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Nobody Asked Me Guys show. First of all, guys, we appreciate your patience. We thank you waiting around on us because we know that you are excited to hear from Dr. Asha Pillai. And she'll pronounce her name correctly for me. But guys, listen, tonight, we will be talking about medical research and other things that go along with that. And of course, I know that none of us are medical experts, but we have one on tonight. So as we discuss the medical research, and well, not as we discuss it, as Dr. Asha discuss it with us, we'll be moving forward. But allow me, please, to just share a little bit about Dr. Asha here. Dr. Pillai group was first to discover innate adaptive networks inducing histocompatibility, mismatched stem cell transplant tolerance, defining the role of invariant natural killer T cells in setting up myeloid and FOXP, and she'll tell us what all that means, 3P, regulatory cell activity and regulating GVHD while maintaining graft versus tumor activity. This is successfully translated to novel SCT techniques for children and adults nationally. The group is developing novel again, she'll tell us what all this is, SCT strategies and INKT immunotherapies for cancer, infectious disease, and autoimmunity. Now, most of my guests know that I am a acute promyelocytic leukemia survivor. Most of you guys already know that, and I was told 30 years ago that I would not survive, but here I am without bone marrow transplant and the whole nine. So Doc can talk to us and tell us about all of that. But again, good afternoon and glad that you're here. Dr. Pillai, will you please share with us a little bit more? I know there's so much more about you. I did receive a resume, but I don't like to butcher people's resumes. I like to offer you the opportunity to share with us what you feel comfortable sharing. So again, good evening, and we're happy that you're here.
I'm muted here. Thank you very much, Melvin. I very much appreciate it. And I'm honored to be on your show and happy to meet with your viewers. I guess, you read something straight off of our research website, which is very dense, and I apologize. I have a little synopsis that I usually have someone send out whenever I have to, I'm interfacing with the general public. But just to give you some background, so I trained in blood disorders and stem cell transplantation, and I trained in both adults and children at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, and then I finished my fellowships at Stanford University in these areas, as well as in transplantation immunology. And I had to design those training programs because at that time, there really wasn't a training program that allowed us to do both adult and child care. And my real interest was to design novel ways to do treatments that would cure globally relevant blood disorders that I felt were not being addressed as well as they could be for health disparities and other reasons. One of them, most important of which, is sickle cell disease, and the other is thalassemia. These are actually the most common blood disorders, most common genetic disorders globally. But they were very undervalued when I started my training. And as you know, and I'm sure many of the viewers are probably even more well-versed than some of us, this is a grossly undervalued area historically for reasons that we all probably understand. I was working on some areas of research there because the founders of stem cell transplant, some of whom were my mentors at Stanford, kept hearing me ask questions about why is it that we need to do this and why do we need to do it that way? And I'm a more research-oriented mind. I did my undergrad there in immunology as well. So finally, and you may know this, in our treatments for cancer and other things, we have rooms where we isolate patients for long periods of time because their immune system is affected by the therapies. So in front of those rooms, we have a thing called an ante-room where there's a whole ritual of hand washing and gowning. And in that period, we do a lot of questioning and talking, discussing as a team. So I would always be asking these questions in and out. Why is it that we're removing the immune system? Because, you know, the immune system would be important against cancers and some of these conditions. So the chemotherapy is sort of counterintuitive in that it's a destructive process to the immune system while we're trying to destroy the cancer. So that was sort of the history of how I got into this research, because one of these founding fathers of transplant finally turned around to me and said, you need to do research. You have to go into that because what you're asking is very relevant. And, you know, I think I got over my issues of confidence or uncertainty about whether I was really suited for that type of a lifestyle. I'm not interested in the competitive aspects of it, but I was interested in the science. And so in any case, I became involved in a laboratory research area and ended up making some discoveries there that were significant. We got funded by the National Institutes of Health. I created my lab at St. Jude Children's Hospital in 2009. Some of the findings we had helped us to find ways that, but all the things that you read out are basically saying, we made a discovery that's based on the principle of maternal fetal tolerance. That is that there's a transplant that actually happens in nature multiple times for a woman. And that is a fetus growing in her. So a pregnancy. And these are always mismatched because the person with whom they're having the child is not matched to them at the histocompatibility level. And so I asked the question, you know, nature has been doing this right for a long time. So why is it that we can't do mismatched transplants? Because if we could do that, we could cure everyone who needed a transplant from their parent or a parent from a child, because these exist and those are the most willing donors. And there was a lot of hand waving around how that's impossible in the field at that time. So we started looking at this time, it was kind of very common to use things called cord blood and other such sources of stem cells if you didn't have a matched donor, which is basically 98 to 99% of African-American individuals at that time, and even more so of other mixed ethnicities. So it was as if you had a harder sentence on yourself for cure of any of these conditions simply by the issue of these ethnic aspects, which are sort of part of the systemic racism of the medical system globally. And so in summary, when we started applying these principles and I started looking into this research, we made this discovery that I stumbled upon this actually, that certain cells that we normally remove from the body in the traditional aggressive way of doing transplants actually are helpful to the transplant across the histocompatibility, these barriers. And so less was more. By actually doing that properly with less toxicity to the patient, keeping their immune system partially intact, we could actually help this process. And no one found that because they were so busy doing this dogmatic approach of removing everything and being more aggressive when cancers came back, when they didn't realize that actually this immune axis is something you're destroying in that process. So you never get to see its benefit. So that's a summary. And when we found those, we did some trials in adults and found that this was actually we still have excellent data from that at Stanford from those trials that were done in the early 2000s. And now this has become haploidentical transplants from parents into children or child into parent is now becoming a standard of care for people who don't have matches. And so the next thing I wanted to do, it occurred to me that we should be able to apply this globally. So the reason to go to St. Jude was to be able to apply that in populations that are international. And fast forward, we wanted to make sure these immune principles also work in children because they are very different in their immune function and the function of their thymus and other organs than older people. And in fact, it's even more potent in children. So what we found, then I came to Miami really with the interest at a major sickle cell center. I was recruited here for the purpose of trying to apply those things to advance cures for children who otherwise, and young people who would never have donors or possibilities of cures. And we've transplanted several tens now of young people who come from all different, very varied ethnic backgrounds, and they're doing very well. And so that was sort of the sequence of how things happened in that area. I sort of became involved in this ethnic disparity issue by the nature of what I wanted to do for people, not really going in there with that intent. And so that's sort of if that gives you a sort of summary of the history behind things and where we are now. So at University of Miami right now, as you know, we have there's such a wide, globally diverse population here with many, many historical different ethnicities mixed in their bloodline that we don't have to worry as much when we don't find a match, we immediately go to the parental donor. So that's something, a great satisfaction to me to see that we've been able to move some of those aspects. Other individuals, of course, other groups have been doing the same in parallel, and our goal is to make this a widely available curative treatment.
Wow, that's very exciting and interesting. And and my audience already, you can't see them, but their thumbs are going up and that kind of thing, which is a perfect segue into some of the things that we want as we discuss tonight. You know, especially in the light of what took place on Wednesday, and most human beings reluctantly want to admit that systemic racism is alive and well, not only in the medical field, but in the educational field and everything else. And compounded, if I might say, using the shotgun approach, compounded then with you being, quote, female, unquote, with this being a male-dominated society basically across the world. Two questions come to mind, and maybe there's in the form of a statement. Dealing first with the systemic, well, no. Let me retract that. Dealing first with, first of all, being a person, being a very bright, academic, intelligent person, but because so many men are uncomfortable with themselves being female, do you find it more difficult actually to move forward with your research and get people to listen and to work along with you? And if not, please share with us why. And the second part of that question, again, will be systemically, because many times people of, quote, color are ignored in all walks of life, and excuses are made as to why they may be more ill, why they may not be, quote, in the medical profession, or why they themselves are not doing better with their health. So that's why I said it's a shotgun approach. And I would, if you will, if you kind of share with us how in the medical profession, life is definitely affected, not only by you being female, and I say that respectfully, and please let me say that, and then being, quote, a minority twice because you're female in the minds of some people, and then twice because you're not a, quote, less melanated, unquote, or a white person. Can you share with us?
No, I think it's actually going to be a bit therapeutic for me to talk to you about that, I'm sure. So thank you for the therapy session on that. No, but I mean this.
I will send you a bill after this.
No problem. But I mean, it's tongue in cheek, but even just, it's a daily occurrence. And as I'm now in what we call NIH study sections, which we review all of the grants that are submitted for the field, transplantation intolerance, and tumor immunology for the National Institutes of Health. I have to really shout out the National Institutes of Health. I submitted an application for my ideas when I was in the midst. I'll backtrack and give you that information in a moment. But in the midst of some of the most intense of that sort of environment, without knowing it, because as an Indian woman, not a Black woman, but I would say that, and these biases, because colorism and racism is not rational. I always, that Melvin and you and I interact on LinkedIn and other areas. So I try to stay very rational about the irrationality of it. So, you're not going to have a rational conversation with someone who's totally irrational, because the sky is green and the sky is going to be green. So, I won't argue that the sky is blue with them, but I have to say that I didn't understand those principles or those issues. I was focused on the science, and by God's grace, I had actually excelled well above my peers most of my academic career. So I hadn't actually seen that until I suddenly skyrocketed up to a ceiling, and it was very clear that I was premature for the preconceived notions people had. And I didn't know what those notions are. I'm the daughter of a scientist also, but he's not a researcher, a physicist, but never was raised to feel that I was in any way different. And that was a real eye-opener for me. So I'll be very frank about that. At that time at Stanford, I don't think I really realized how tight that machine is for preventing people from escaping those preconceived paradigms. And that's not only at Stanford, it's a global phenomenon in academia. It is greatly enmeshed. I know a lot more about it now than I did then, as you know. So I'm very active in the process of dismantling. I'm not about to let something so irrational guide the processes that should be guided by rationality and our higher goods. But the summary there is that even today, so every day I deal with that. I deal with an unconscious bias component, and I deal with the conscious components. And I would state that the conscious components, it's hard to say which is worse. And I would also tell you, I know who I'm talking to, and I'm sure that the audience is also quite savvy on what I'm saying. I believe in respecting intelligence. So I would say that you all probably know that it doesn't really matter which one is going on, right? The endpoint is the same. And the problem that I see is really that I'm not saying that it would be justified if there were highly functional people who were racist, but I rarely find those two coming together. So generally the mediocrity is subsumed by this tendency to use other things to get ahead. And that is actually my biggest problem with the whole system of racism and bigotry, misogyny, and all these other aspects that play in. I have, to be direct to your question, I've experienced all of that continuously since I was funded by the NIH, not because of the NIH, but because of the power and freedom that brought me in my fellow, from the point I was a fellow. And there are a lot of people who tend to be in leadership roles because they've gone there through hook or crook, who are very, very nefarious characters. So I understand when people say that. It's hard for people to believe that, I've been able to get through in this way. I would say it's a combination of a lot of grace and a lot of tenacity, because even today, I'm constantly dealing with some new issue or other that one of these characters brings up simply because of their own insecurity. I think the hardest thing was when I realized also the degree to which people don't really necessarily always want to cure conditions that are curable for communities that are a resource for them. It's the most pathologic system I've ever seen. So, you'll always hear the truth straight from me. So I think that's always, and I would say that that's the thing that's more of a challenge, is that the system that's been set up more implicitly favors people who will kowtow to that.
Yes.
So whether I was white or a male or not, I've actually seen white males who function like I do put in the same situation, simply because of their capacity and their tenacity and their being very straight, because it's a threat to that whole institution. So this is how I started to understand at an operational level what these things were, without really knowing in the DEI sense, the terminology, the specializations and the specific MOs of these kinds of individuals. But I studied them, and I'm well known for being very, very systematic researcher. So I research anything. If you're interacting with me, I'm learning something. And so I studied all this quite a lot. And I think one of the most important things I had to study were personality disorders, because most of these people do have some component of a narcissism, a sociopathy. Something is going on there in the background. And rather than just confront that and get help, they tend to go into these other modes of power grabbing. So I would say that I've dealt with all of those. You can imagine that you don't get through these kinds of areas without encountering them. But coming back to this, what ended up happening is that I put an application through for this. At that time, 10 years ago, this was unheard of. And I could have moved this even much faster. So moving through molasses is what I'm doing, and I'm doing it. But I could be moving through water or air if I didn't have those obstacles. That said, I have to state in all honesty that from what I'm seeing in my brothers and sisters, the surroundings around me, my colleagues, the whole system has so many different aspects of this that it's hard to say that mine is somehow more difficult than any of the others. The entire system is not working at its peak because of that. It's certainly not working near even 50% of capacity. So it's actually an issue of excellence. It's an issue of quality control. to remove these kinds of characters from the system and to remove these forces from the system. The system is not as inefficient as it appears. It doesn't need to be this difficult. It doesn't need to be this tedious. I have watched people prevent clinical trials that would have, now that some of the things that we've already made clear have taken 10 years to bring to clinical trials, which should only take us a year or two. And so it's often because someone is sitting there somewhere who doesn't really want that to succeed because they have an agenda. They end up being wrong most of the time because of the mediocrity factor, as I mentioned. And then you have to wait patiently because of your, call it what you will, brown status, female status, young status, I don't have enough gray hairs, whatever those things are. But that really shouldn't be a factor. It should be getting those things to patients or getting those things to whatever that endpoint is. So I hope I answered that. I think that is the biggest problem I do see in the system, but it's a quality assurance problem. I actually like to reframe it in that way so that people see it's a problem for people of all genders, orientations, colors because of that. And another thing I want to emphasize, sorry, one last thing I'll say, one thing I really want to emphasize is an example that one of our spiritual teachers in India often speaks about, which is if the building, if you live on the 10th floor of the building and there's a massive fire on the first floor, this is equivalent. Ignoring this is equivalent to saying, this is not my problem. It will become your problem very soon. So what you saw on Wednesday was the effect of the 10th floor people ignoring the fire on the first floor for a long time. You could have seen that coming.
You're absolutely right. Wow. You know, and again, I mean, we're going to keep talking because I'm loving what you're saying. And being a former high school principal and just being an educator myself, what you're sharing, it is difficult even in education. People keep asking, you know, well, why are the schools so horrible? Why are this, that, the third? Because of what you've just said. You have people sitting in superintendent's chairs that have agendas that's not about the students. But when you put the cameras in their faces, and you have newspaper people recording what they're saying, they know all the right things to say, but you have individuals within your system, quite frankly, that are smarter than you, that really do know how to get it done. And then they try to sit on you and try to squash you. And even as a principal, I would have teachers get upset because I try to make them understand very clearly, this is not about you. However, given the proper attitude, it can be because of you. And so as I'm listening to what you're sharing, I mean, that's just brilliant. It's beautiful. But, you know, as we look at systemic racism and as we look at those individuals that choose to have what I like to call convenient amnesia when it comes to processing and moving, and those individuals, you know, when we had the fallout, it quickly got out of the limelight of exposing those parents with certain means to be able to bypass an academic process. And as you named them, those characters, those unfortunately are many of the same individuals that are in these positions and posturing. So as we talk about health and health disparities, and you alluded to it earlier as to research and things that could have been done in 1 year, take 10 years, and we hear all the dismal if I can use the word prognosis, when it comes a lot of times being of African-American descent and that kind of thing. If I can mention again briefly, when I was diagnosed in 1990 with acute promyelocytic leukemia, I was given primarily no hope without a bone marrow transplant. And then even at that, I was not given much hope as well. I was in and out of the Salmon Cancer. Most people say they've never heard of the Salmon Cancer Treatment Center, but it's located right there in Dallas. I'd never heard of it either. I'd gone to a cancer center here. So, you know, and finally I said, well, you know, minorities don't really donate. It'd be hard to find a donor. I understood that because quite honestly, as we're on air, people of color are very skeptical of, quote, the medical profession because of some of the things you've just said.
Right.
And because of a lot of the hidden racism and that kind of thing that people will not admit to. So when we move forward, as we talk about and that's why I call it a shotgun effect, not only are you walking through the path of being born and happy to be woman, female, however people try to pronounce it. Many times they try to be condescending in the definition. if you're not a male. And I tell people all the time, I'm 100% male, but if I can't respect women, then I have a problem. So that's why I'm saying it the way that I'm saying it, is that as you move forward in your research, and I know that we talked a little bit about, I mentioned briefly the immunology process. I'm getting tongue-tied here, transplantation, that kind of thing. How significant is the research when it comes to not only finding overall cures that you shared earlier about, since people have now become more, for lack of a better word, integrated, quote, and I hate the word racially, because of intermarriage and that kind of thing. How is it more difficult to get individuals to buy into the process of the research that you do?
Oh, I see. That's a great question. Oh,
yes.
An excellent question. I would say that it's only becoming more and more relevant. And let me put it this way. So my first patient at Stanford, I was a fellow on the pediatric. I had done my adult training, and then with many patients who had your condition. And it was just after some of the treatments, the use of a specific type of vitamin type therapy, ATRA, which is now used to cure your condition, which wasn't introduced in 1990. I know, because I was an undergraduate at that time there, and we didn't have that. So, but I had just gone from there into my pediatric training, and my first patient, if you look on the National Marrow Donor Program website, his photo is there. The story goes quickly. I'll say this. Saturday morning, I'm on call. My first call as a pediatric fellow with some senior faculty. And I was known for kind of being ahead of that because I was used to doing my work as an adult specialist also. And so I was looking at the blood smear on this child who came in. So we look at it under the microscope, 18 months old, whose father was, his father was Chinese and, mainland Chinese and Vietnamese. And his mother was half Italian, half Irish and half Japanese. So this young boy has a mother who's a neurologist and a father who's an internist in Palo Alto. They're, obsessive compulsive. And so they were bathing their child and found some lump in his abdomen. Brought him to the ER. Lo and behold, we did a blood smear, and he had one of the most aggressive types of childhood leukemia. And so that I knew the moment I'm talking to the family that this leukemia requires transplantation for cure, at least in the current standard. Things will change and maybe we'll be out of that space, but in that space, it still requires that. And I knew immediately that the possibility of him having a match was near zero. So fast forward 2 years of therapy, and they actually had even a child to try to bring in a cord blood unit that could be potentially have matched him, wasn't matched, paid themselves to scour all these donor registries and had no match. And so the long and short is that a donor for another person who was not helped and passed away, a person who donated for that purpose, who was from a completely different ethnic background, ended up being a partial match, and we were able to do that transplant. He's now going on 20 years old and is in college. So my point I'm trying to make there is a lot of my patients from those periods are now deciding to become hematologists, going out in the world and doing very important things. But the process is still the same. And as we have more ethnic diversity, this process becomes more difficult if we stay in these racially homogenized thought processes and systems. I want to point out that all the data for transplantation around matching was based on Caucasian patients and Caucasian donors in the traditional Caucasian sense, not the Caucasus region. So if you think about that, the other point that I should make is that the cells that you described in the title that you were giving, what people don't realize is that they're very, very powerful in many ethnicities that come from Africa and the Aboriginal regions, as well as from Asia. And this is because they have very, very potent anti-parasitic and other very potent immune functions against cancer and other things that were evolved to be very strong. So the irony is that these treatments sometimes work better in those patients. If we don't study those, how will we know? And so the summary there is that I think that as the world becomes more global, I've never been focused on that. I've been focused on doing the right thing. And I think it's funny how things do tend to converge in the right way through sometimes very, I like to say sometimes you go right to go left in the most strangest way, the strangest of ways when you're pursuing the truth in science. And so I believe that what's going to happen and what is happening is that society is coming together to further support this type of work because they see that the irony is what works for these patients works very perfectly well for Caucasians, but the opposite may not be true. So I would say that it's going to become more and more important. The problems that we're going to face are the resistance that you saw on Wednesday. But in my personal viewpoint, I was actually happy to see it. I would say that it's almost better that we saw on Wednesday what we saw because it actually revealed a breach in the entire security forces of the Capitol. Now, if you didn't know that,
Wow.
if you think about it carefully, as a researcher, I look at it from a different perspective. If I would rather know that now than when our new administration gets in without knowing those breaches, I would rather know those problems. So I'd rather know the problem makers than not be aware. So one of the advantages of this is that it brings them out of the woodwork.
I am in total agreement. And it's almost like we had this conversation already because my thoughts were exactly the same. I was saddened by it. I hate it happened, but I was happy that it happened for all the reasons that you've just stated. Having been, well, actually, I do diversity trainings, and it never ceases to amaze me when I'm standing in front of individuals and we're talking about regular occurrences in life, and for someone to blatantly sit and say, well, I don't see that, and I don't understand how people get, it blows, even as a professional diversity trainer, it blows me away to see how obstinate people are and how resistant they are and how individuals refuse to accept the fact that they have been living a lie, they've been taught lies, and it blows me away. So
well, let me ask you something. I'm going to ask you a counter question if you don't mind.
Please.
The dialogue. This is something I've always really wanted to open up with people who have regular expertise and professional work in this area. I have been observing the way that the doors start to open when there is no give from the responders. And what I mean by that specifically is there's almost a certain knowing. And of course, I'm not speaking about violent, racist environments where you really you don't have the power to be able to resist. But I would say that when you're dealing with the type of person you mentioned, the disingenuous one, right, where we know that there's disingenuity. We both know, the person speaking and the person receiving. So really, it's an issue of how we need to engage. And I'm not going to say that there's a right or wrong way, but I'm learning. And even from my mistakes, I'm learning that those people really do know when we know. And when we know and we choose to stand in that power, they really don't have the same power that we give them otherwise. I've literally made the mistake of giving it before because I didn't know better.
Yes.
So I wanted to get your thoughts on that. It's something that I think this is where we must go as a society. The reason I say it is it's not a theoretical or esoteric or distant concept. It's a very pragmatic point. How are we going to go? Because if you do that as one person with one person, that's one thing. But notice what we're doing on LinkedIn. We are united in this.
Yes, we are. And to your point, we have been so indoctrinated to assimilate. No one ever takes the time to really have conversations. It's simply the fact that because I am, and I mean this sarcastically, but I really mean this, because I am Lord and Master, then it does not matter how you've obtained your education, where you got it from. It does not matter even that you are smarter than me. It just simply means that you are supposed to make me feel comfortable. So whereby you are required, if I can use that word, to assimilate into an area that will make me comfortable. So your thoughts does not matter. And what I have been, and God dropped this in my spirit. I'm also a poet. One day I was sitting down, and I'll be very honest with you, I was very angry. And I was thinking about all the craziness and the racism, et cetera. As a matter of fact, I'd had my football scholarship taken away from me at Louisiana Tech University because of my views way back in the old days. And,
And it
you know, I
wasn't
just,
even, yeah, there wasn't much space to be able to voice them.
yes. And so something just said, and it had to be God's spirit. I didn't hear any voices and any lightning flash, anything like that. And it said, but nobody asked me. So now when I'm doing my trainings, I pull that poem out and I ask them, I want any single individual in this training to please stand or stay seated and explain to us, what was your experience like to be inquired of prior to you being born? And I get this startled look. And so I know already when I asked that question that they think I have misquoted myself. I said, no, pardon me? Do you mind repeating that? I said, sure. I said, will you please share with us how it felt to be asked prior to the fertilization process, what race that you want to be, how tall that you want to be, how short did you want to be, what color did you want? And by this time, you know, then everybody starts to click in and say what color you wanted your eyes, because as my poem, nobody asked me. I didn't have a choice about the region, the origin, my geographic, nothing. Nobody asked me, but yet I am still being charged and vilified about something that I had no control over. So why should I apologize for that? And that gets them, it gets them going, because I like to make people think. I really do, because you know, it's like, okay, so you say, and I'll be honest with you as well, and I answer to, and I'll be through with this, even answering your question. When I was coaching and playing sports, and it really came from my mother, who does not, and my mom does not have a high school education. Now, my dad was a civil engineer. And I'd ask people all the time, you know, I said, why do you call people student athletes? And I get all this back and forth. So I found, as you being a researcher, you can appreciate this. Finally, I decided to look up the word student athlete. And I want to, and you know what came up? And I think it was 1952. Some athlete who happened to have been a Caucasian athlete had gotten injured. Mom was given the university holy hell about his medical bills. Because they did not want to pay the medical bills, they hire a lawyer. Well, they just go to university lawyers. They got to go through all these loopholes. Thus, the conclusion was, since your son is not an employee of our institution, he is a student, whereby we are not obligated to pay his medical fees. That's where the word student athlete was born. But to show you how we fashion things and how we fool people is that no one took the time to understand that the origin of those two words, student athlete, was not to give credence and credit to some academic prowess that this dumb jock was miraculously supposed to have. It had nothing to do with the fact that he or she had been blessed by his or her creator to have certain skills.
Sets of skills, yeah.
Physically, and also produce academically. So to this very day, I give people fits every time they say, well, what do you think about this student athlete? I said, you mean the student? Oh, I think he's brilliant. I think she's brilliant. No. I mean, you know, but he's such a great athlete. I said, and so please make your point. And see, they have no idea when they start talking.
Unconscious bias operating, yeah. You actually answered the other question I had in line, which was what the meaning behind the title of your series, and now it makes perfect sense to me. So
nobody asked me, Guy. Absolutely. You know, because and please allow me to say, and this is your interview, but you did ask me this question.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was very honored when I have people say, you know, your poetry makes us think. And so they said, you know, we're going to start calling you the thinking poet. And I said, well, our poetry makes you think.
Thinking, right.
So when you ask me that question, I really do appreciate you asking me that. That is how the show came about, the Nobody Asked Me Guy, because as we talk about what you and I are discussing right now about the racism and the hatred and people trying to vilify people and talking about who should be here and who should be there and that kind of thing. One last thing I will say, this is not to pat me on the back. As I recovered from my leukemia, I wrote a book called, excuse me, Dying on My Feet, because I literally was. And that's another story I'll tell you about sometime. I was carrying some athletes to be checked, and that's where my leukemia was discovered. So anyway, I wrote the book Dying on My Feet. And within that book, I told some, it's kind of like a bio kind of sort of, and I was sharing, I was in that era of forced integration in the South. I was born and written in Jim Crow South. And we'd always heard about
where was that, Melvin? Where in the South? I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yes, I relocated back. Don't ask me why. I relocated back to the South, but I was born and reared in the Jim Crow South.
Where in the South?
Louisiana.
Okay.
Louisiana. And we'd always heard about how smart all of the quote unquote white kids were. So here we are in English class, and we're kicking their behinds. And one of our teachers had the audacity to keep several of us in the class one day and inquired about our former high school, which was Charlotte Mitchell High School. And she had just acted very emphatically, and called us by name and said, Melvin, Jerry, Tasha, y'all must didn't go to Charlotte Mitchell. And she had this look in her face. And in the South, you don't disrespect any adult, let alone a stranger. And I didn't think I was being disrespectful, but I simply stated, I said, no, ma'am, what are you trying to say? That they didn't teach us anything there? And of course, she became very upset and called the office and said I was disturbing her class, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, I'll be honest with you, I was waiting for my revenge. So one day, we were doing some I think it was, what were we doing? Heck, I don't know. But anyway, kids were struggling. I raised my hand and I kept my hand up. And I wrote about this in my book. And so finally, after she couldn't ignore me after about 15 minutes, she asked me, yeah, what do you want? I said, where are all of these smart people I've been here? Oh man, everybody in the room knew what I was talking about. I mean, it was total silence. I said, where's all these smart people I've been hearing about? Again, and I never got in trouble in school. Never. I'm a senior, getting ready to graduate. She hit the buzzer again, said I was causing a disturbance in her class. So as you ask me that question, and as we talk about racism across the board, I have been immersed in it all of my entire life, to the point where my poor great-grandmother, God bless her soul, she was so afraid of people of less melanation that if she saw a car coming, she'd be deathly afraid, because she thought it was the Ku Klux Klan coming to the Black neighborhood to do damage, and that kind of thing. So when I talk to people, professionals, Dr. Asha, is that I love to hear individuals that have enough guts to stand up and talk about this entire craziness. So if I might ask this last question, I don't want to keep you all night. As you move throughout your life, and since you and I both are sharing about this whole crazy racism piece, is it more polarized within the medical profession than just in your everyday walk of life, encountering this ugly systemic racism, or is it about the same?
That's a great question. And I'll tell you why it's a great question. Yes and no, because it has both answers. So let's start with the yes part. The yes part is that, to go straight to your question, this actually gets at the heart of something much larger. We need to write about this. I'll work with you on this. But the summary here is that because I'm not convinced, this is going to sound heretical, but I'm not convinced that race is at the center of racism. I'm pretty convinced that erasure is at the center of racism. And erasure comes from deep-seated insecurities of the person doing it. That doesn't mean I give them sympathy. It simply means that I'm starting to put together a profile of the person I expect to do that kind of thing. Whenever they get the chance, silently, when nobody can see them, can catch them at it, which does a lot of damage. And when I come to that, because it relates to erasure, or eracism, ERASISM, erasing things and people, the type of person who's insecure enough to want to erase someone will grab at anything they can to do that. So the most obvious things are what they go for, because it's not a very creative process. Since it involves your reptilian brain, sort of your most primitive area, it literally takes the most primitive routes. And I think the thing we need to understand, which is now we can actually get into some deeper things with that question, which I think is why it's such a great question. If you look at all of the people who are involved in Wednesdays, I'm going to keep it very concrete. The Wednesday's events, you can say whatever you would like. We all can say to ourselves whatever we would like in delusional thinking about them belonging to a particular socioeconomic group or not being educated. That is absolutely not accurate. But what is common among all of them, if I had to make a hypothesis, and we'd have to test it, but I'm pretty sure it'll pan out, is that they have in common a common sense of threat. And their sense of, it's a reptilian brain again working. So they have a fear brain that's in overdrive about lack of what? So insecurity. Well, the average Black person who's dealt with all these other things, your grandmother had PTSD from whatever she dealt with. She has insecurity, but she doesn't take it out in the form of erasing another group of people. So there's criminality involved in this. And what we have to understand is that that is the unacceptable part, right? You may have all kinds of insecurities, but not everybody takes it out as something that they can then create a whole worldview about to delusionally make another group, either their servants, their whatever else you'd like to say, their scapegoats for, these are pathologic processes. And once we start identifying it as a serious illness, now I'm not speaking about an illness necessarily needing treating, and an illness needing a diagnosis and putting them together in that group. So then you make a conscious choice, if you have the conscious ability to control it, to be in that group or not. So there's a certain amount of accountability there. And if you don't have the ability to make that differentiation because you're so unconsciously racist, then you need help, and we may be able to help you because it is unconscious. So rather than going at unconscious bias training and all these other things that we do with the assumption that all these people are innocent, let's just go for the possibility that there's a common theme and there's a group of people who aren't going to be wanting to rehabilitate because they're consciously that way, and they need to be held accountable. Whether they're the CEO or the milkman, right? They are going to, or the milk lady, they're going to be fired for doing that kind of thing.
Right.
They will also have no livelihood, and they need to think about the consequences of that in the same way that any other person would be thought of. And then the group that is really unconscious and they don't realize it because they don't see the option to go somewhere else. Those are the people who might be rehabilitable. But we kind of have to have an operational framework for addressing racists and racism. And I would say rather than addressing racists, addressing racism. The problem is that we often, I'm speaking now as an outsider to the DEI field. I'm an observer of this and a student of it now. And I'm not convinced that the way that we're approaching it is necessarily, I won't say best or worst, but going to work in the way that we need it. The way we need it to work is an operational definition. So it really doesn't matter why you burn the house down. You burned it, right? So let's get at that issue rather than all the other parts. So if there's a problem of a racist worldview, let's get at the root of what that racist worldview is about. Now, again, there are going to be 100 different flavors of that, but we need to at least take the middle chunk of that mountain. Don't try to get the entire, but let's get the middle chunk of that mountain and really start gnawing away at it, drilling away at it. Because if we keep looking at it from let's do this approach, that approach, and these smaller things, we're moving rocks on this mountain. We're not actually, we need to tunnel through the center of this mountain. And I'm not trying to be grandiose in that. It's just that I like to go to the root cause of a problem, or else I'm not going to work on it. Because I just find that it's not otherwise useful. I want to go back to one other thing on that note, which is that, my grandparents lived in colonial India, And when we say that, we are a country that literally had a group of people come there and create a what we call third world out of something that was probably one of the most wealthy countries in the world, as was true for many countries in Africa and many other countries before colonial rule. But the psychologic robbery that happened was so severe that it continued to my mother's generation in terms of acquiescence to authority, that whole idea. And so for me, I still have those things that reverberate because of the way I was raised by my own parents. So I have to always think about that factor in how I address these types of issues. And I think we need to be very conscious of the fact that the way we're going to get at this is to go across ethnicities and historical backgrounds at the issue of what is really at the root of racism, not racism against Black people. And I'm not trying to demean that, or racism against
No.
And I'm not also going to diminish in any way, shape, or form that colorism is a serious problem among Asians. It is truly there. What I'm trying to say is I can literally show you several photographs and people you would never realize that they're actually indigenous Indian people. They would look straight out of any other area of Africa. You wouldn't know the difference. So the point is that they're also mistreated in the same way because it's an issue of the erasure. That's the problem. So what I'm trying to come to is I almost feel that we could do better by getting groups together around the center of the issue of removing this group of powers that are forced on erasure. Because if I wasn't discriminating against somebody based on their capacity and a meritocracy, we would have many more people from those backgrounds that are being objectified in leadership roles, correct? That would just happen, not because I'm trying to put them there. I'm just not trying to remove them from their natural ascent.
Right.
And you know what I'm talking about because everyone who's experienced this knows exactly what that feels like, the vice grip around the neck.
Yes.
Right? Not to breathe. So I would say that's the part of what I would say about yes, in answer to your question. It's more in medicine because the number of insecure people when you go up into, especially as I'm doing things that are global now, we're curing this condition in many different countries now. I get to deal with all those people. And then they all have their little localized, I don't like women, I don't like this, I don't like people who have long noses, whatever their issue is. It's still the same erasure thing. On the issue of no, I would say that it's still the same global problem. So wow. If I go to a banking conference, I'm going to encounter the same, that's the reason I can interact with you all. Because if you would say that my area, when you tried to read that region of research, it doesn't make very much sense to anyone unless I make it lay language, right? But the point is that there's no difference in what we're talking about. We're talking about exactly the same thing. Mm-hmm. And that goes back to the answer of no, because it's not so grandiose that we need to, and that's one of my goals in academia. I think we need to stop the grandiosity around this being something intellectual. It's not something intellectual. Trust me, your reptilian brain, whether you're playing golf or you're doing research. Because if you're turning it on inappropriately, I have Black graduate students in my program, and I won't get into them. I would love for you to meet some of them. One of them is, they're brilliant. But that never occurred to me that there would be someone who would be trying to say that they weren't based on their Black. Yes. And so the point that I'm trying to, the insecurity runs very deep.
Why don't we do a show with you and them?
I would love for them to have.
I'm open to it.
I think you should hear from them because, so what I would say is that growing people's confidence around that also has to do with what we've already created in, for example, in LinkedIn or other communities. What we need to do is to band together in a powerful way across specialty areas and regions. And that's why I joined forces with you all on LinkedIn for no other reason than that I believe that very strongly. So I think in the same way that I might empower someone in the grocery store and that person might empower me, we should be able to do this across specialties in a concerted and systematic and long-lasting way, not just a fleeting interaction in the grocery store line where we feel good when we come out of there. We need to do this longitudinally, and we literally need to put rubber bands across the nails that we are and string this in such a way that no racist is going to make it through there very easily. That's what we need to do. And I feel that that's going to be a big solution to a lot of the aspects of what we're dealing with. We have been very much graced by the young generation not willing to put up with any more BS. They are not going to put up with it.
Right. You're absolutely right.
So a
Well, you know
monkey in
what?
a suit is still going to be a monkey in a suit. And I think that's what we need to take the attitude that we are going to back that up with our experience and our expertise because we have some seniority in what we're doing. Back them up with that, and we need to work across specialties in that way. I think that'll do a lot.
Wow. This has been epic. I don't know any other way. I mean, I know that we can get our thesauruses out and use all kinds of words to describe sitting, talking with you, Dr. Asha. Now, pronounce your last name for me one more time.
Oh, it's Pillai.
Pillai, Dr. Asha Pillai. It's been an extreme pleasure. And I really do want to invite you to come on again. And we can have a series talking about this whole process because I hear you very loudly. And let me say, my audience is going crazy over here with thumbs up and hearts and all of that stuff.
Oh, I'd love to hear what you have to say.
I'm going to have to share with you some of their comments. But nothing is in our excuse me, comment section here, but they're putting on the other monitor here. But listen, let me say to you that it's been a great pleasure having you. And I sincerely want to say live that we want to have you back and real soon. You along with some of your students or you by yourself, because we really need to expand this further. And that is what happens to us. People like to have arguments, not conversations.
Right.
So we are going to have conversations, and with you being a researcher, information to back it up. So we certainly are so pleased that you're here with us tonight on the Nobody Asked Me Guy show. I want to invite you back again. Do you have any last, I mean, what you've just shared has been magnificent, but if you have any parting words, please share those with us at this time.
Thank you, Melvin. I guess my parting words to your audience and to you would be, let's band together on the common shared understanding we have of what racism and discrimination really are. And let's do it with an intent that we bridge across divides. And I think when we do that, we have a unique opportunity in history right now. And I think we can all sense the palpability of it. So one of the advantages of Wednesday is you've never seen someone vomit nonsense like that as clearly as you did on, so basically the system is at its tipping point, I think. And if we can utilize this in professional settings, not only in the demonstration arena, but in professional settings, let's get in there and say, you know what, here's my colleague, Melvin Lars, how do you know Melvin Lars? Well, that's a long story. I just want you to, we're going to have a session here and do this for leaders. We need to actually start creating systems in institutions where there's so much exposure on that system that they must change it. And I think the power is going to be in use of social media, use of these types of platforms to bring us together, but also to expose those issues. The fact that I discussed what I've discussed, those folks in those areas are now partially exposed, right? So there's a part of that has to go on. We have to be delicate. I know everyone has jobs to keep and other things that they have to rationally think about, but it doesn't have to be all or none. There's an entire space in between there. We need to push this a bit. So that would be where I'd leave it.
Wow, excellent. Thank you so very much. And listen, allow me to say thank you so very much. And let me share with our audience. You guys know you've been listening to the Nobody Asked Me Guy show. You know we do not pull punches on this show. You guys know that. And the powerful people that we have, like Dr. Asha, just keeps bringing the smoke, which brings me to tomorrow night. Tomorrow evening, 4:30 p.m., we are going to have Uncle Selwyn Jones, who's the uncle of George Floyd. Now, not only are we going to have Uncle Selwyn Jones, the uncle of George Floyd, we're going to have Tawana, who is the sister or first cousin of Breonna Taylor. We're going to have Angela, who also is a family member of George Floyd's. And we're going to have Mrs. Clay, whose son, Rashad, was murdered by the Chicago police, etc. Now, why are we having this? Because Uncle, and I want to give credit where credit is due. Uncle Selwyn and I were having a conversation, and he said, I just want to have a platform where these people that are hurting like my family is, we can all just kind of come together and talk about it on a platform and share with others. So the Nobody Asked Me Guy show is providing that platform on tomorrow, 4:30 p.m. Please feel free to come back and join us at that time. Look at our Facebook page, the Nobody Asked Me Guy show, or you can look me up on YouTube, and we will be posting the Zoom information. So I want you guys to come back and join us. But again, Dr. Asha, we appreciate you, and we will be working together. And I know that we'll be connecting on
I look forward to
LinkedIn. So listen, have a great night. And we didn't intend to keep you this long,
No,
but when I was a little boy, we in the South, we say we're just getting gooder and gooder. So it was just getting gooder and gooder. So listen, thank you so very much for joining us, and have a great and blessed evening.
Thank you. Same to you and your audience.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.